Get out. This house is mine now. Mike's voice thundered through the hallways of the home we'd grown up in, each word landing like a punch. He tossed another box of my belongings onto the front lawn as I stood frozen, watching 30 years of memories scatter across the grass like fallen autumn leaves. My name is Emily Parker. I'm 35 years old, and today my own brother was evicting me from our childhood home, the very place our grandfather had raised us after our parents died. You can't do this, Mike, I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could, though fury threatened to break through. Grandpa left this house to both of us. Mike sneered, the same smug expression he'd worn ever since his real estate career took off. Actually, I can. The deed's in my name now. Grandpa signed it over to me before he passed. You were too busy running around saving forests to care about this place anyway. I watched in silent disbelief as he flung my photo albums into the growing pile. Decades of wildlife photography and conservation work, moments Grandpa had once proudly displayed in this very home. Mike had always scoffed at my career. But Grandpa understood. And I've got big plans for this property, Mike went on. Developers are offering millions for this land. Time to tear down this old wreck and build something worthwhile. My heart dropped. Tear it down. The beautifully restored Victorian home. The gardens Grandpa had nurtured until his final days. The ancient oak tree with our old tire swing still swaying in the breeze, gone. You know that's not what Grandpa wanted, I whispered, bending down to pick up a photograph, one of Grandpa standing proudly in front of his rose garden. He wanted this place preserved. Mike just laughed, cold and unfamiliar. What he wanted doesn't matter. He's gone. I'm in charge now. You have until sunset to get out. So I packed. Quietly. Carefully. Mike didn't lift a finger to help. He just stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching with satisfaction as I loaded my life into boxes. This was the same brother who once built fairy houses with me in the backyard. Now he couldn't be bothered to offer a trash bag. Then a memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in months. Grandpa's last Christmas, just 6 months ago. He'd pulled me aside and insisted on showing me something in the basement. Mike kept trying to interrupt, talking about market value and rezoning. But Grandpa was persistent. The heart of this house isn't in the walls, Emmy, he'd said, his hand resting on the old safe behind layers of dusty storage. It's in the truth we protect. I hadn't understood what he meant back then. I'd been too focused on documenting butterfly migration patterns in the nearby forest. But now, as Mike stood gloating in the doorway, it all made sense. You might want to check the basement safe before you start your demolition, I said, lifting the last box into my trunk. Grandpa always said this house held more than just memories. Mike's smug look faltered. I already checked. There's nothing in that safe. Smiled. Did you use the right combination? The one Grandpa used to sing to us when we were kids. The one about the butterflies and the oak tree. The color drained from Mike's face. He had always hated those songs. Had always rolled his eyes and walked away when Grandpa sang about the land and the creatures that lived on it. But I had listened. Every lyric, every number. I remembered them all. You're lying, he shouted as I backed down the driveway. You're just trying to save that worthless house. I didn't answer. Just waved. Let him wonder. Let him worry. That night, in my small apartment, I opened my phone and sent a single message to the local historical society. It's time. Check your email for Grandpa Parker's documentation. And then I waited. 3 weeks later, my inbox was full. The historical society had uncovered everything Grandpa had preserved. His detailed records, the land's ecological value, its protected status. Just as he said. My phone buzzed again. Mike's name lit up the screen. I had ignored his last 15 calls, but this time I answered. What did you do? He demanded. His voice trembled with panic and rage. Some people from the historical society are here, Mike said, his voice tight. They're talking about protected status. And historical significance. They have documents, Emily. Documents with Grandpa's signature. I smiled, remembering the afternoon Grandpa had signed those papers with a shaky but determined hand. "Oh, are they finally doing the inspection? Grandpa set that up months ago. They're saying this house was part of the Underground Railroad," Mike continued, voice cracking. "That there are tunnels underneath. They're calling it a historical landmark." I could hear the panic creeping in. The development company just pulled out of the deal. "Interesting," I said evenly. "Did you check the basement safe yet? The combinations in Grandpa's butterfly song. You know, the one you never cared to learn." The line went quiet. "You knew," he finally said. "You knew all along. While I was drafting contracts, making plans. Grandpa tried to tell you, Mike. You were too busy plotting to tear down his life's work. Did you know he spent 30 years documenting this house's history? Working with historians. Verifying every detail." I heard a loud crash on the other end of the line. "This is ridiculous. I'll fight it. I'll challenge the historical status." "Good luck with that," I replied. "Grandpa's documentation is airtight." He didn't just preserve the house, Mike. He preserved the truth. After I hung up, I pulled out the copy of Grandpa's documents he'd handed me last Christmas. The originals were with the Historical Society now, but this copy stayed with me, a reminder of his legacy and foresight. The next day, I drove past our childhood home. It was surrounded by historians, photographers, and preservationists. They were measuring entrances, inspecting the architecture, and photographing the grounds. Mike stood on the porch, pale and stunned as his multimillion-dollar dreams slipped through his fingers. One of the historians spotted me. "Miss Parker," he said, beaming, "your grandfather's records are extraordinary. His maps of the tunnel system, the first-hand accounts, it's all been validated. This is a major historical find." I caught Mike's eye. The disbelief, the fury. I could see him remembering every time he'd mocked Grandpa's stories, every moment he brushed off his obsession with history as nothing more than a silly old man's ramblings. "The butterfly garden makes sense now," the historian said. "Your grandfather's notes explained how safe houses were marked with butterfly symbols. Brilliant, really. And he kept that tradition alive." I nodded, recalling all the afternoons Grandpa spent with me in that garden, teaching me the songs, the patterns, the codes. Every verse of his butterfly song had been a breadcrumb of history, one Mike had never bothered to follow. As I turned to leave, Mike rushed off the porch. "This isn't over, Emily. You can't just turn our house into a museum." "I didn't," I said quietly. "Grandpa did. He protected it long before you dreamed of bulldozing it. Maybe if you'd spent more time listening and less time calculating property values, you'd have known that." Looking at my brother, frustrated, powerless, I felt a bittersweet mix of sorrow and satisfaction. The house would be safe now. Grandpa's legacy wouldn't end in rubble and real estate. "You know what's ironic?" I added, pausing at my car. "If you'd checked the safe, you'd have found that Grandpa left something for both of us. But I guess you'll never know what that was." I drove away, leaving Mike standing in the middle of the lawn, surrounded by people documenting every inch of the house he once thought was his to destroy. In the rearview mirror, I saw him staring after me, confused, angry, and finally maybe realizing what he'd missed. That evening, flipping through old family photos, I came across my favorite picture of Grandpa in his butterfly garden. On the back, in his careful handwriting, was something I'd never noticed. "Sometimes the smallest creatures leave the biggest legacy. Keep watching, Emmy. Keep protecting what matters." I smiled, tears in my eyes. That's exactly what I had done. 1 month later, I stood in front of our childhood home as workers installed a bronze plaque on the gate. The Parker House. Established 1859. A verified site of the Underground Railroad. Grandpa's dream had been realized. And his legacy would live on. Beneath the new bronze plaque on the front gate, in smaller script, were the words, "Preserved by Thomas Parker, in memory of those who sought freedom." Mike hadn't spoken to me since the Historical Society's inspection. According to neighbors, he'd quietly moved into a downtown apartment, his grand plans for luxury condos shattered by Grandpa's decades of meticulous research and documentation. "Miss Parker." I turned to see Miss Thompson, the director of the Historical Society, holding a small, familiar metal box. "We found this in the basement safe. Your grandfather left explicit instructions. It's only to be opened when both of his grandchildren are present." I stared at the box, my heart catching in my throat. I remembered Grandpa's smile that last Christmas, the way he looked at me with something unspoken behind his eyes. "Have you contacted my brother?" "Yes." She nodded. "He's agreed to come. He should be here this afternoon. Perhaps. He might even stay." 3 hours later, Mike's BMW pulled into the driveway. He looked different, worn down, less polished. The mask of the confident real estate mogul had cracked, and for a moment, I glimpsed the boy I'd once built fairy houses with. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, not meeting my eyes as we entered Grandpa's study, still intact, now preserved as part of the landmark site. Miss Thompson set the box on Grandpa's desk and stepped back. "I'll give you two some privacy. The combination," I said softly, "is in the Butterfly song." Mike's jaw tensed. He hated that song. Always had. But I began to hum anyway, the melody we'd heard since childhood. "Monarchs in the garden high, 4 wings touching summer sky." Each verse held a number, hidden in plain sight all along. The lock clicked open. Inside were 2 envelopes and a small wooden box. I handed Mike the second envelope and opened the first, a letter in Grandpa's familiar, careful handwriting. "My dear Emily and Michael, if you're reading this, then the truth of this house has come to light. Emily, you always understood what needed protecting, not just the walls or the butterflies, but the stories, the sacrifices. Michael, you saw the financial value, but not yet the true worth of our family's legacy. Still, this house was never meant to divide you. It was meant to teach you about history, about love, about what we choose to preserve. Let this be the beginning, not the end. Grandpa." Mike's hands trembled as he opened his envelope. Inside were 2 property deeds, 50 acres of land each, one in his name, one in mine. "He bought the surrounding land," Mike whispered. 50 acres each. "Protected land," I added, scanning my copy. "It can't be developed. But it can be used, for environmental or historical education." The wooden box held 2 old keys and 1 final note. "The land is your inheritance. But what you build on it, that will be your legacy. Choose wisely." Mike sat down in Grandpa's old leather chair, the one he'd once called junk. His gaze drifted across the room. "All this time," he murmured, "I thought Grandpa was just clinging to an old house. But he was building something bigger." "He was protecting something bigger," I said. "He wanted us to understand that some things are worth more than money." For the first time in years, Mike looked at me without defensiveness or distance. "I really messed up, didn't I?" I nodded, but my anger had faded into something softer. "You did. But maybe it's not too late to make it right." And so we talked. 4 hours. About Grandpa's vision, about how far we'd drifted, about the choices we still had. The Historical Society had plans to convert the house into a museum honoring both its role in the Underground Railroad and its ecological importance. "They'll need someone to manage the business side of things," I mentioned casually. "Someone with property experience." Mike blinked. "You think they'd consider me?" "Why not? You know this house better than anyone. Besides," I smiled, "I could use help turning my land into a butterfly sanctuary and outdoor classroom. Someone who knows planning, budgets, logistics." 6 months later, I stood in my new butterfly garden, watching a group of children follow a trail through vibrant blooms and educational displays that Mike had helped design. The Parker House had become a respected museum, drawing school groups and curious tourists from across the state. Mike, now the museum's business manager, had found his place in preserving history rather than erasing it. He'd even started learning Grandpa's butterfly song, though he still got the verses out of order sometimes. Looking up at the freshly painted Parker House, its rose garden blooming and its underground tunnels preserved. I thought about the kind of legacy Grandpa truly left behind. Not just a house, not just land, but lessons and forgiveness, and the reminder that some things are meant to last. As I turned to help a young visitor identify a monarch caterpillar, I remembered the photo I'd found weeks ago, Grandpa smiling in the butterfly garden. On the back, in his faded handwriting, it read, "Sometimes the smallest creatures leave the biggest legacy. Keep watching, Emmy. Keep protecting what matters." Smiled. That's exactly what I'd done. And now, we were doing it together.